Okay.
All right. You ready?
Sure.
Okay. Welcome, everyone. I know that people are still signing on, and just as another reminder, if you are just joining us, please address all of your questions and comments in the Etherpad, and also put your name and where you're from. That is the Etherpad you can link to in the comment section where you're viewing. So today's webinar will focus on selecting and creating open educational resources, or OERs, for all students. Our presenters will be Stahl and Rhianon Gutierrez of CAST, who served as authors of the OER pages of UDL On Campus, which is the brand new resource that we've created with our TACT grantees in mind. Skip is an expert in accessible media and serves as CAST Senior Policy Analyst and Director of the NIMA Center for Creating Accessible Instructional Materials. Rhianon is a multimedia producer and designer who brings expertise as both a user and creator of accessible and universally designed media. And my name is Alyssa Boucher, and I am also on the Open Project and part of the UDL On Campus website. So today's objectives, if you can follow along, we are sharing the slides with you. The objectives include define and give an overview of the benefits and challenges of open educational resources, define accessibility and universal design for learning, or UDL, and their application OER creation, and learn how to select and create OERs that will be accessible and consider the 3 principles of UDL. So as we go along, if you have any questions or comments, please post them in the Etherpad, and we will address them at the end.
Great. So this is Skip. I'm the one with a slightly deeper voice in this crew. Thank you all for coming. We're going to be talking about OERs in the broadest possible sense. So thinking about everything from full courses to modules to textbooks, across multiple media, video, images, software, and any other tools and materials that are openly available, freely offered to educators and to students. And so I want to start with benefits. It's clear over the past few years that OERs have ascended in popularity and are increasingly showing up either as full courses from an OER catalog, or components of courses, or resources that are being assigned by faculty and accessed by students. And because they're often associated with certificate granting programs or a variety of matriculated kind of long-term goal projects, it's important to be planful about incorporating OERs into instructional practice. And OERs can support learning goals. They can be most useful in the context of learning materials, curriculum resources. And more recently, we're seeing assessment profiles, resources, tools, and instruments be embedded in OERs. And that's also associated with the increase in personalization, or the capability of digital delivery systems and content to track student progress and to be highly customizable to meet students' needs, and moving kind of away from a one-size-fits-all approach. From our perspective, accessibility goes hand in hand with the whole personalization process. It's a fundamental civil right, and it's also just a smart thing to be thinking about. Often at CAST we say that if you can create an instructional environment and experience for students at the margins, those are students who may have significant and unique needs related to how they access and interact with instructional materials. If you can create solutions for those students, and those solutions are effective, you go a long way towards creating solutions for everyone, kind of in the middle of the bell curve. So instructors need to be informed and somewhat knowledgeable, particularly as we talk about OERs in the context of how they're selected, how they're acquired, and how they're used, and in many cases created. So thinking kind of planfully about how to select and or create OER content I think is a crucial part of this whole process. Next one. So there are challenges associated with OER selection, acquisition, and use. The challenges tend to fall into a number of categories, but the one that comes up first is if an OER is a digital resource and it needs to be retrofitted for accessibility, that creates a major challenge for most educational organizations and institutions. Kind of ironically, 15, 20 years ago, our concern was retrofitting paper and paper-based, print-based materials, and so we would effectively digitize them and scan them so the text could be read aloud, or that text equivalents for images were made available to students with visual impairments. And the vision was that as everything migrated effectively towards digital materials, those challenges would be minimized. And the ironic part is in some cases they're maximized because digital materials are much harder to retrofit in an ad hoc way at the local level. So selecting materials, particularly digital resources that are designed with the widest possible range of student in mind from the beginning, makes life much easier downstream, both for instructors and students. Much in the same way that inaccessible websites can create a barrier for students with disabilities, make it difficult for them to access or navigate content. The same is true for open educational resources. The one I think about often is kind of image-based PDF documents that actually have, there's no ability to navigate, select, work your way through a document unless you have vision or unless you can control a mouse. So just some things to think about as we go through talking about OERs in general. So there's a strong argument, legal argument behind the need to make sure that instructional materials are accessible. I'm sure many of you are well aware of the Section 504 requirements under the Rehabilitation Act of 1972 and the ADA, essentially requiring institutions, educational institutions, to offer substantially equivalent experiences for students. And that gets played out in digital resources to make sure those resources are usable by the widest possible range of students, and that includes students with disabilities. So just to give you some quick background information, there was an interesting study, Hewlett Foundation in 2011, looking at open course textbooks available for students, and that the majority of these were web-based, 42% were downloadable PDFs. But what was kind of most compelling was that a large percentage of these materials had problems with page layout, with headers, with tables, and none of the PDFs that were reviewed in this study were accessible. I will say that in the intervening 3 years that we've seen some of an increase of attention being paid to accessibility, particularly PDF accessibility. And some of that has come from some aggressive litigation on the part of the Office of Civil Rights from the U.S. Department of Education. But we also don't think that waiting for OCR to litigate on the basis of inaccessibility is the way to go to correct this, that we can design things from the beginning to make them more accessible.
Hi, this is Rhianon talking now. I'm the youngest voice in the room. I'm really excited to be talking about Universal Design for Learning, or UDL. Some of you may be familiar with this. Us here at CAST have been focusing a lot on creating this website, UDL On Campus, with UDL in mind. So let me tell you a little bit about the context for UDL. So you can actually find UDL in the Higher Education Opportunity Act of 2008, and in Section 103.24, Universal Design for Learning it is a scientifically valid framework for guiding educational practice that provides flexibility. That's a key word, flexibility, in the ways that information is presented, the ways students respond or demonstrate knowledge and skills, and the ways that students are engaged. It also reduces barriers in instruction, provides appropriate accommodations, supports, and challenges, and maintains high achievement expectations for all students, including students with disabilities and students who are limited English proficient. So this may seem a little dense to you, so we're going to actually unpack this a little bit. So universal design for learning, really, every time I talk about this to people who are completely unfamiliar, these are the three most important things you need to know. One of them is the learner variability is the norm, not the exception. We don't teach to the middle. We want to plan for the widest range of learners from the start. We don't want to retrofit. But accessibility is important to this conversation because accessibility is the baseline for UDL. I mean, UDL is something we're aspiring to because in UDL, we are playing the larger idea of creating a flexible curriculum with goals, methods, materials, and assessments that support learner achievement. And UDL is essentially based on 3 principles, and we're going to go into each of these principles. The first one is representation, then there's action and expression, and then engagement. So let's talk a little bit about those 3. So there's actually a neurological foundation when we talk about representation, action, expression, and engagement. The principle of representation is linked to the recognition networks. That'll be the first brain that you see, and that's the what of learning. The second one, action expression, is connected to the strategic networks, which is the how of learning. So people taking in information, how is it that they're going to be expressing the understanding of this? And then the third, final one, and the most important, is the affective networks, which is connected to engagement, is the why of learning. So people are taking in information, they're expressing their understanding, but why should they care? You want people to be coming back, especially in the context of online courses, because there is a problem with that. So we want to make sure that we design in a way that not only includes people, but makes them want to come back for more. So representation, there are various ways that we can think about representation. The first one being that it deals with multimodal representation of materials via text, images, symbols, and audio. So you don't want to just simply represent something with text. You might want to have some audio support, some visual support. Right now, I'm showing you a text-based representation. It also includes a picture, but we have audio that's supporting it and giving you a much fuller and richer description of what's going on. And you certainly want to provide options for perception. And one thing that comes to mind actually is when you think about videos, having captions there and transcriptions for the content, because it's represented in different ways so the learners can access it regardless of their needs. Prior knowledge is actually really critical in terms of the learner's interaction with the content, because they're coming in and they may have limited understanding, they may have a greater understanding, and so that will influence the way that they are interacting with this content. But ultimately, you want them to be making meaning out of this. All of these representations have to mean something. The second principle is action and expression. And when we think about action and expression, we are thinking about ways to support learning processes. We want to be able to support learners in setting goals and planning, organizing, strategizing, and even modifying processes as needed. We actually have a great resource on our website about executive functioning, because when we think about supporting learners, in online courses, some learners may do an exceptional job of courses in person because they have that human support in person. But when it comes to online courses, sometimes that's absent. So you have to really, really think about the way in which you structure that course so that the learners will be able to navigate through it well. And we think about action expression. We also want to consider that there are ways for people who use assistive technologies to be able to engage with the material. So actually, when you work with digital tools, you are allowing students to come in and being able to choose the ways that work for them. Like, for example, I am hard of hearing, and sometimes I need people to actually have visuals when they present content, so that I'm able to understand what's going on. Now, there may be other people who may want to use that visual, other people who may not. So being able to have that digital space from the start is actually good for flexibility. And then I also want to bring attention to the fact that some people who use assistive technologies, especially if we're considering text, we want them to be able to have options to magnify their content or to amplify any kind of audio that they may be hearing. And the truth is that you're not going to necessarily be dealing with people who are completely blind all the time or completely deaf. But there are many people who will be coming in with functional limitations for any reason who may need that additional support at that moment, whether it's text-based or audio or visual. And then the third principle is engagement. And like I said, this is a very, very critical one because you want learners to be coming back and you want them to be engaging with these resources. And when we consider engagement, learners are progressing towards mastery. They're in the mode of reflection. They're self-assessing. They're thinking critically. And some learners may get to this stage. I mean, we are hoping that they get to this stage. And sometimes when I think about engagement, the content is contextualized to their lives. So depending on the course they're teaching, you want it to be meaningful. And you want learners to be seeking more information on their own.
Great, thank you. Okay, so when we put together the whole resource on UDL on Campus, taking a look at open educational resources and accessibility, it became clear to us that there were many, many facets and many areas that we should investigate. We're not, I don't think that what we have is totally exhaustive, but it's, there's a lot of depth to it and hopefully a lot of breadth. And we encourage you to take a look at the resource on udloncampus.cas.org. So I just wanted to touch base on a couple of things. We're not going to do kind of hand-by-hand walkthrough of the resource, but just let you know it's there, and we wanted to touch on some salient points. So the accessibility open educational resources on UDL on Campus, there's an overview which provides a context, everything from personalization to the legal justification and requirements for accessibility and instructional materials, including OERs, and then touching in more detail on what the challenges are, and then going into distinct categories for selecting, creating, and using OER resources. In the creating section, you'll also find some very specific guidelines for what we consider essential as being the baseline and what we consider to be optimal for ensuring the broadest possible reach of any resources and the highest level of interactivity and access. So thinking about accessibility to the baseline, we tend to go back to Section 508 as a baseline because it's a national standard. Section 508 has been in the process of revision or refresh, as the Access Board refers to it, for the past 5 or 6, 7 years. And the reason it needed a refresh is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines that are promoted by the World Wide Web Consortium differed somewhat from Section 508. So WCAG 2AA technical details are highly specific. There's a link on the PowerPoint directly to them. We decided to stick with 508 simply because a majority of curriculum producers who produce for post-secondary institutions also produce materials for the federal government. And as a consequence, because they're producing for the federal government, they're actually required to adhere to Section 508 accessibility guidelines. So many of them incorporate those accessibility guidelines as a baseline into their products that are available commercially for post-secondary institutions. So given that, that it's an understandable, concrete, and non-ambiguous set of requirements for accessibility. That's why we tend to gravitate towards 508, not because we think it's the ultimate end-all and be-all of accessibility. There are some nice checklist resources out there. WebAIM in particular, it's webaim.org/standard/508/checklist is a way to compare a resource you may be looking at or a resource you may be created against the 508 expectations. And then the other resource I wanted to make you aware of is there's a marvelous resource created by Project One that is highly detailed about how to create an accessible online learning experience for the widest possible range of students. And if you're feeling really technical, then you can gravitate over to the WCAG 2 technical details at the World Wide Web Consortium site. But it's not for the faint of heart, so it's can be pretty intense. So let's just touch base on the 508 functional criteria. And the reason I decided to use this slide is it's actually, for me, one of the clearest. So it doesn't get into the weeds around Section 508, but it talks about what the overall intentions are. And I was immersed in this a couple of years ago when I was project director for what was known as the Post-Secondary AIM Commission, but it was the Commission on Accessible Instructional Materials and Students with Disabilities in Post-Secondary Education, and a congressional commission. And one of the challenges was that neither 508 or WCAG 2 actually focuses specifically on instructional materials, and so as a consequence doesn't really get down to the page level or the particular item level. It tends to be somewhat general. And one of the things that I like about this set of functional performance criteria is it can be applied at any level of granularity, at the course level, at the module level, unit. So I just want to go over these. So the key is that at least one mode of operation or information retrieval does not require user vision. So if you're creating or looking at instructional materials and it's primarily text, one of the things you want to ask yourself is this text selectable? Can I highlight this text? If you can highlight text, in all likelihood it's going to be able to be read aloud because the highlighting process actually creates a buffer and then synthetic speech readers or screen readers can pick up that text and read it aloud. If it's an image-based PDF, as I referenced earlier, that text cannot be read aloud. And so you work backwards and you say, okay, this document really requires somebody has vision, or to access to it, I should be looking for something else. At least one mode of operation, information retrieval, should not require user hearing. If there's a resource and it's primarily audio, then you have to have some sort of text equivalent or image equivalent that makes the information equitably available to individuals who are hard of hearing. Similarly, at least one mode of operation and information retrieval does not require user speech. That's just something to think about. If you've got a resource and it requires spoken input, is there an alternative? Does it allow for text input? Important consideration. And finally, at least one mode of operation information doesn't require fine motor control or simultaneous actions, having to do two things simultaneously. This is another key factor. Most browsers, for example, if there are hotspots or links on the page, if you can't control a mouse, you can use the tab and enter key. So you can tab through various links, and then when you get to a link, it's highlighted using the tab button. If you hit the enter key, it activates the link. So as long as there's an alternative to mouse control or mouse button control, you can use a keyboard. If it's keyboard mapped, that means it's also available to assistive technologies like single switches and head printing devices, etc. So as I said, I like the functional criteria because it can apply to kind of any level of granularity to a particular resource, and this is a good set of guidelines to think about. So going beyond this and thinking about the whole process of creating instructional materials or resources, some key features to keep in mind if you're building something or you wish to build something to keep as a resource for your instructional process. And keep in mind that, I often hear people say building a resource or an open educational resource is quite time consuming. I would agree. To do it right is a time-consuming process, but also think about if it takes you 6 or even 8 months to create a full course with that's on an open educational resource basis, you may end up using that course effectively for the next 3, 4, 5 years with only minor updates as you move through it. So kind of amateurizing your investment across a number of years makes it quite worthwhile to build your own resources. So some things to keep in mind. Providing complete navigation throughout the resource is important, and I'll go into some more detail about how to best do this. Creating a structure to the resource that's meaningful so that the structure doesn't change if a student moves from one screen to another or one page to another, and all of a sudden they have to learn how to reorient themselves and use the resource. And provide alternative access to media content. Where are we at? Let's see. Okay, great. So the important thing I just wanted to touch base on and see if I can concretize this for folks. I would assume that most of you out there are using Microsoft Word for one task or another. I certainly know that in my life I'm either using Word or Google Docs or something else 85% of the time. Many of us, when we're asked to create a Microsoft Word document that includes a title and a variety of headings, simply gravitate towards, to create a title, you might select the text, choose 24-point Helvetica and make it bold. The problem with doing that is that while it changes the representation of the actual text on the screen, it's not providing any information around structure, and that's the purpose of styles. So using styles in Microsoft Word, and it'll be there as a menu item, is a whole nother set of commands to the software that tells it that this document has an inherent structure to it. And that structure then becomes the basis for navigation through the document. So there's some screenshots on the page, just highlighting various aspects of what it looks like to apply styles. But so here's the reason that styles are really important. If you have a highly styled, or what we refer to often as a structured, a well-structured document, then someone coming through and reading that document using a screen reader can jump from heading 1 to heading 1 because they know it's the key kind of components of the document. And it's not a big deal if it's a 2-page document. It's a huge deal if it's a 25-page document. And in all likelihood, as an author of a document that has multiple pages, at least in a print layout, you're going to be adding multiple headings. The good news is that using styles in Word, you can add multiple levels of headings. I've gone all the way down to heading level 5 at various times. And each one of those, because it's nested and there's a structure to it, you want to make sure that your use of headings is fairly consistent, but you certainly want to use headings. From the author's perspective, there are some significant benefits to using styles beyond accessibility. If you are to export a Word document into HTML or as a PDF, that structure that you've created in Word is carried with it. So the document, if you create an accessible document in Microsoft Word or a structured document in Microsoft Word and you send it out as a PDF, that structure goes with it. It significantly increases the accessibility of the PDF document. Similarly, it allows you to take a look at the document in outline view or document map, and each one of the headings becomes a clickable element, so you can jump from one heading position to another. In addition to which, if you create a really smart document in Microsoft Word and you decide you want to export it to PowerPoint, using styles and the outline view allows you to do an automatic export from Microsoft Word into a PowerPoint slide deck. Finally, the use of styles also allows you to automatically generate a table of contents with page numbers. Because styles essentially creates a structure within a document that can pretty much benefit everyone. So we'll go on to the next slide. Great. Further, document headings, graphic organizers help connect the content and support executive functions and organizations. So as I said previously, the use of structure in Microsoft Word documents, particularly by using styles, is something that I harp on repeatedly to all my co-authors, not only because it creates essential access for individuals who need that access, particularly individuals who have low vision or limited motor control and need to be able to navigate through what could be a fairly dense document fairly quickly. But it also allows for, if you transform that document into multiple formats or different media types like a PowerPoint, then the structure that you've added to this gets carried through it. And so you're essentially building it right from the start, and there's no need to go through extensive retrofitting.
Okay, and the third part that we mentioned earlier is to provide alternative access to media content. Now there's a lot of things we could talk about here, but I'm going to focus on a couple. The first one being images. If you go to our resource online, we talk about this extensively. Right here, we actually have a screenshot example of something from Microsoft Word for formatting a picture. Now, I don't know how often you guys use this. I only have been using it in the past year, but if you go into format picture and you use alt text, you provide a short description. It's usually 3 to 5 words that describes what the image is. And then the description field, which has the big circle, you have more information. And we actually encourage you to put the description there because you can write more than 3 to 5 words, and it crosses all these different areas. And the thing about alt text and long description is that it provides a context for the image. So those who are using screen readers, if they need to be able to understand what the image is, if there's no information there, and there is no information there. So by having this information, you're giving them access to this image. And if you go to this link, this is a direct link to the page on UDL On Campus that shows you all the different benefits of making your images both accessible and universally designed, considering UDL principles. And the second example after images is videos. Now, videos are a huge monster. I know because I create videos all the time, but we have a variety of resources to provide support. But I want to tell you right off the bat that the benefits of captions and transcripts are not simply for people who cannot hear well, not simply for people who are English language learners. There are much, much more benefits. For example, let's say that you were to have a video that's embedded in your resources, whether it's live on the web page or it's within your document. If you have a transcript of this video, by having a text-based version of it, you actually increase the ability for people to find your content. So if people are just doing Google searches, then they'll be able to trace your content and go to your page. And so who would not want to do that? So I think that's an excellent argument for transcripts. Another way is that, for example, let's say we use various devices. We use our laptops, we use our desktops, we use tablets, we use smartphones, and sometimes videos just don't work, or they take forever to load. You have a text version there, whether you are using your screen reading device, if you have a visual impairment of sorts, or simply you just want quick access to the information, you want to be able to get from point A to point B, or you just want the information, the transcript is there. I also want to mention when it comes to transcripts that when we think about them, we often think, oh, they're a text representation of audio, and that's absolutely true. They are telling you what you are hearing. But I want to go a step beyond that and say that we can consider adding the visual description of what we are seeing. So let's say, for example, you were to have, I'm going to show you one later, but just imagine that you were to have a screen that was showing you this little man who's just walking across the screen, and then there's a voiceover narration. Now you would get the voiceover narration, but you would also want to have a description of the man walking across the screen, especially if he's in a context that's really important, like if he's in the middle of a riot or a protest, and that's important to your course description. And also, if you have a really solid transcript, you can translate that over to captions. And captions can be done quite easily on YouTube, and we actually provide support for that on our page as well if you go to this link. So transcripts and captions are so much at our fingertips right now that the argument for them or the argument against them is almost like it's increasingly non-existing anymore. Like there's so many compelling reasons to use them, and I'm always happy to answer any questions you have. And the third thing I want to mention is audio description. Now, audio description is providing access to visual content. So this is usually done with a higher amount of resources. Sometimes you will possibly go to theatrical showings, whether it's movie theater or it's the stage, and you'll get an audio description of what's happening visually. And these are not always things that can happen if you have low budgets, but they are something that can be done if you were to find proper support around you. But if you were interested in this at all, the link that we have here gives you some tips on doing your own audio description, even if it's something as simple as just announcing what your title is or just announcing some key elements that are there visually. I would actually like to show you guys a really good example of how we are combining all three of these access elements in a video of ours. I'm going to click this page right here, and if for any reason it doesn't work here, you have the link and you'll be able to see it on your screen, hopefully. Let me change it. All right, I am changing on my screen. Now you can see what I look like. All right, let's see. You have my searching face. All right, let's see. So desktop, there we go. Ooh, I don't know what's happening there. Is it panicking on me?
Rhea, I can post it.
Oh, you can see it now. There we go. Awesome. Okay. So this, I'm assuming, shared the link with you guys so that you can see the video that I'm going to be showing you. Now, we have a resource on executive functioning, as I mentioned earlier, and there's the text content. But we also have a video that gives you a little bit of a background very quickly on what executive functioning is. And I want to show you, if you scroll down underneath the heading of relevance, you will see a video with animated figures staring at you, and there's a transcript right below it. If you were to click on the arrow, you will see a transcript that includes both visual and the audio elements. And this is what we call a collated transcript, C-O-L-L-A-T-E-D. I didn't even know about that term until recently, so it's a helpful one to know. So it includes both audio and visual, as I mentioned. And you can either view this video on the page or on YouTube. So I'm just going to play the first minute of it so you can see that the captions are there. Let me see my screen. There's no audio.
Because you're muted.
Okay, now my audio is turned off because we didn't want to have any conflict here with the audio. But if you go and watch this video in your own time, you'll see that there are two different voices there. The one that we start with is the one who is the narrator, and she announces that this is the title. And then you have the narrator who's just talking about the video in general. So we thought it was really important to include this so that people know right off the bat this is the subject of the film. Beyond that, we want to consider. I'll go back to my PowerPoint. That's what I'm doing here. All right. So beyond videos, if you're just interested in the applications, we're talking a lot about the importance of all these things. So the actual application of all these different multimedia elements, making them accessible in UDL, we have the resource on flexible multimedia. The link is on the bottom, and it contains pages that show you how to work with text, images, audio, video, and some web-based stuff. There are also pages, again, on transcripts, captions, and audio description. There are a lot of resources that a lot of other people have curated, but ours is specifically geared towards people such as yourself who are designing these online courses for educational purposes. So if you have any questions about these at all, we are the ones who are writing these pages, so we are more than happy to answer any that you may have regarding this. And then we have the concluding point. So Alyssa, do you want to read this?
Why don't we hold off on that and just respond to these questions
sure.
before we do
Sure.
So what I'd like to do is actually respond. We have a couple of questions, so I'll read the first one. Do you have a checklist of steps or practices that TAC developers should follow in creating their curriculum? Similarly, is there a document that can be used to review the UDL accessibility resources after completion or when selecting OER? We don't have a specific checklist, but I can point you to a couple of resources. And the reason we haven't created one of our own is actually there are quite a few out there that are quite good that already exist. So webaim.org has the Section 508 checklist. And that's a good place to start, particularly from a developer perspective, because it points to things that you should be attending to as you're thinking about creating a resource. The functional indicators that I referenced early on are a good thing to kind of tape to the wall just behind your computer. So as you're building something, you can look up and say, is this usable by someone who has no vision? If someone has no hands, can they access this content? That sort of thing.
Can you say that again, Skip?
Yeah, so if I was saying the functional descriptors, that I referenced earlier, the 508 functional indicators.
The WebAIM ones?
No, they're actually from 508, but WebAIM has the Section 508 checklist. The other thing you should be aware of is, and there's a whole section on this on the UDL On Campus website, is what we refer to as what is referred to as a VPAT, VPAT, and that stands for Voluntary Product Accessibility Template. So majority of vendors who produce materials for the federal government, and that could be any office of the federal government, usually submit what's known as a voluntary product accessibility template along with their product. And what the VPAT does is it provides in detail how the particular product, and in this case let's just focus on software, conforms to or meets the Section 508 accessibility requirements. And one way to get an example of that would be to take a look at a resource from the Center on Online Learning and Students with Disabilities. And that website is centerononlinelearning.org. And there's a resource there called, I believe it's the Snapshot of Accessibility, or VPAT table. It's a searchable table detailing online learning resources, predominantly used in K-12, but many of them are also used in post-secondary. So they include things like Blackboard and Canvas and Desire to Learn and content management systems and also content creation systems. And there are links there to the VPATs that are offered by those vendors. So these are predominantly commercial, but I believe there's some OER references there as well. And that gives you a sense of what a VPAT looks like and is a pretty good checklist for ensuring that you're applying some due diligence when you're either creating or acquiring open educational resources. So as I said, we don't have one specifically through On Campus, but we point to a number of them that we think are quite effective. WebAIM.org and the VPAT table at Center on Online Learning.org. Let's see, there was one other one other question.
Mm-hmm.
Can you point to some existing OER that's great from a UDL accessibility perspective? I don't have anything off the top of my head, Remay, but the one place that's worthwhile looking is OERcommons.org. And the reason I suggest that is that OER Commons has partnered with another .org, Achieve.org. Achieve.org has created a set of 8 rubrics for selecting accessible instructional materials, OERs in particular. And we've referenced this on the On Campus website. And I believe you can search OER Commons for grade level content areas. So you could search for, 11th grade physics or something like that. And then you can screen through the OER content based on the Achieve rubrics, including the accessibility rubric. And these are kind of crowdsourced ratings, but it's one way of getting some sense of how accessible OER content is. But you're asking a good question about, is there some way we could highlight 1 or 2 OERs that we think have done a really good job from a UDL accessibility perspective. So let us take that as a task and see if we can generate some specific resources for you in that regard.
Mm-hmm. I know that on our pages regarding using OER, I lost my sentence. Back up a bit. I apologize. So we actually have a couple of pages that talk about just the legal context for creating accessible OERs. We also have ones about the creation of OERs. So there are a number of links there. So I would definitely, in your own time, comb through some of those to see what they are. I also want to bring up, now this is not particularly related to a specific course. It's not history. It's not, any other social sciences domain, but I have been working on an EPUB that I'm aiming to make both accessible and UDLized. So that includes not just a web-based version, which you can currently find on our website. I will send the link to Alyssa and post it on there, but also a digital version that you can read as an EPUB, or you can read as Microsoft Word as a PDF. And within that document, it's not just text. It also has videos, it has images, and those things themselves are accessible. You have the descriptions of images, and you also have the captions and the transcripts for the video. So I would love feedback on that in the future. So I'm glad to share the link with you guys, and hear what you have to say about that. I don't know if there's any more questions. Maybe we can just conclude. If you want to read the conclusion part. I'm not trying to end this. We just have 8 minutes.
This is Alyssa's part.
Oh, Alyssa said no, but if she wants to.
Right, we caught her off guard. Want me to?
Sure.
All right, go ahead. So we're happy to respond to any more questions. We hope that you take a good look at the resources that we posted on UDL On Campus. Re-mentioned EPUB, just as a orienting statement. EPUB is the kind of emerging standard for commercial ebooks, but it's also we hope, an emerging standard for OER electronic book production as well, because it has a marvelous array of accessibility features built into it. So the fact that many commercial heavy players in the commercial ebook world are gravitating towards EPUB is a good sign, because it means the number of EPUB readers beyond Apple iBooks and some others are going to start to expand, and they'll take advantage of accessibility built in from the beginning, which is a terrific thing. So from a concluding perspective, instructors need to be informed, as do institutions. And I think there's an institutional role here that I certainly encourage institutions to develop some sort of protocol for ensuring that their materials are, to the greatest extent possible, usable by the broadest wide range of students. The reason I think it's an institutional responsibility is if there's a complaint, and some of you may have experienced the Office of Civil Rights complaint, OCR, when it investigates an institution or a complaint, doesn't just look at the one issue that's being complained about, they look at everything. And OCR is known for its thoroughness, and that thoroughness can, in some ways, tie up your institution for the next 18 months as they look at everything from your walkways to your communication to your registration process to your course delivery to how students are engaged, et cetera, et cetera. So taking a bit of time at the beginning to develop a protocol and procedure that you're asking instructors to follow when they post content or use OERs saves a lot of headache down the road. It also means that it helps those instructional personnel become more knowledgeable about the variability that exists in their classrooms. And I think the variability piece is an important one, because that brings us back to universal design for learning. We consider accessibility to be an essential but insufficient in itself to be fully UDL, because our orientation is really about learning, not about information access. But the old adage, if you can't reach them, you can't teach them, holds sway here. So accessibility is a fundamental component of universal design for learning, and it helps expand awareness of learner variability in the instructional process. And finally, we've posted a number of resources on the UDL On Campus website that can facilitate the creation of highly accessible, interactive, compelling, and very UDL-like open educational resources. And we urge you to take a look at some of those. We've mentioned a few during the course of this webinar. There are more still, and we tend to add them as they grow, and we hope they provide you with the resources that you need.
Great. Well, thank you to Skip and Rhi for a very informative webinar, and thank you to everyone who joined. And this Etherpad will remain up if you want to go back to the link and access any of those links that we posted. You can also reach out to us. The best place to get us is udloncamp.cast. Oh, I'm sorry, udloncamp@cast.org is the email to reach the group of us who put together these resources, and we can field some of those questions there. So thank you very much, everyone, and we are so glad you joined us.
Great, bye.